coming to the final stretch here, our last part, which is the future energy landscape of Virginia. And even before I begin the questions, I think we've been thinking about it in VACO in terms of we've been so focused on solar and battery storage and to a lesser degree wind, but there's the transmission lines, which you talked about. We've seen if you go to the PJM queue, like you talked about, there's a lot of in the queue for these larger transmission lines, which are crisscrossing some communities, which are having impacts. And an interesting about the transmission lines is localities have no say on that land use. They do on the energy generation side, but not on the transmission lines. But then the thing that we haven't talked about is a little bit about also the demand, which we're seeing for energy, in large part driven by data centers. So let me start with the first question. So this mandate for zero greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector over the next few decades, that's going to play out in the landscape of Virginia. What future trends in terms of energy demand, generation, and transmission do you think we can expect? And what should counties be preparing for when it comes to planning and land use in those regards?
Sure. So I think in many ways, they can expect to continue to see the status quo of localities that are seeing and have seen a lot of activity on utility scale solar side are likely going to continue to see that. Especially if there are localities that have sufficient infrastructure from a transmission standpoint in terms of location and capacity and available land and proximity. They're going to continue to see projects. I'm sure there is in any given locality a functional maximum, that's dependent on a lot of different variables, the price of land, the availability of land, the sufficiency of transmission infrastructure. We've not seen that yet, so it'll be interesting to see when a community approaches that and what that looks like. That I think would be interesting for other localities to kind of see what is the maximum development capacity in any given locality for utility scale solar. Certainly we've touched on this, but transmission generation capacity, we would expect to see improvements and upgrades to transmission infrastructure. And that's one of those variables that is something that is maybe at one level today, but it could change, right? So it's kind of understanding that impact and how it affects projects and land use. Demand, we're certainly seeing in the state, and it's affecting maybe decisions statewide, the growth in data centers. And how that affects demand and what that may do to compliance or consistency with the requirements of the Clean Energy Act or the VCEA. And I would hope to see the state begin to be more responsive on the demand side. Certainly we would love to work with localities in a proactive way on the demand side, and looking to address utilizing renewables to reduce demand at the source, whether that's for residences or commercial or industrial. We've not seen that a lot yet, but certainly there are localities within the state that are working on that angle as well, and some regional planning districts as well.
Yeah, I think you.
Yeah,
I was going to say, I think you really touch on something there that we're seeing here at VACO, which is for the data centers. What we've learned is they run 24/7 at nearly peak capacity. And as we, understand, the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. And then not only that, the battery storage technology today doesn't provide enough long duration storage. And so there's concern, I think, in some sectors in the energy sector and in some from the data centers themselves, all of this renewable energy going is it actually going to meet our demand? And in fact, we've seen through the Dominion Energy Integrated Resource Plan, where they have to look out 10, 15 years into the future, they're showing that even with doubling the amount of solar in the Virginia Clean Economy Act, they would still need to get some other source of what they call firm energy that can really be dispatched to meet that demand. And so I think it's you raise an interesting question, is like how that's the capacity issue. How much land should be dedicated to utility scale solar, particularly if it's actually not going to meet our energy demand?
Right, right. And, I do think it is important to consider too, and we do see articles almost daily at this point talking about, you know, resurgence, maybe a light resurgence in coal, but also a lot of interest in natural gas, whether that is within Dominion's territory, within Virginia, or within the PJM network. Because we also have to realize that, both Dominion and AEP's portfolio can be comprised of renewable energy sources and is comprised of energy sources that are not generated in Virginia. And so I think that is something to take into account, is the ability and capacity for some of these resources and sources of energy to be derived from outside of Virginia. And on the other hand, the other side of that is needing to provide for a more stable energy source than maybe renewable can provide for, and looking at carbon-based sources to supplement and provide for that. I think we talked about, certainly we're going to continue to see more energy storage, battery energy storage integration. I would hope to see, and I kind of talked about this, more distributed energy resources, rooftop solar, community solar, microgrids. I think something that can, and I would say these would help on the demand side as well. And it would be great to see those leveraged more consistently across the localities. I think one of the things that we will begin to see that maybe we've not yet seen a full impact of is the electrification of transportation and more EVs, and the impact that that will have on demand and the need for supply. Even before joining the Berkley group, I was doing some research about EVs, and some of the countries that have a significant amount of renewable distribution or renewable generation on their grid network, to ensure that they have a reliable grid, they're looking at ways where they can leverage not just batteries, traditional batteries, but even EVs as battery sinks to ensure the reliability of the grid and the reliability of power being distributed into the grid. And on the other side of that, we have to consider that there's more, with more EVs, there's maybe more demand, and how that's being managed as well. I think there's also, continued grid modernization as we've talked about, and smart grid technologies, and ways to manage the distribution of electricity across the grid based on demand and need. Talked about data centers and more energy consumption and that side of things. Resilience of the grid, climate adaptation, dealing with demands that are associated with heat waves, dealing with the resilience of infrastructure associated with more frequent extreme weather events, whether those are hurricanes or heat waves or cold snaps. I think all of those will be more and more relevant over the coming years and decades. I think also looking at emerging energy technologies, we certainly know in the state of Virginia, the governor has a strong interest in looking at small modular reactors for nuclear. And apparently there is at least two potentially viable sites to explore that and look at some type of pilot program. So that will be interesting to see how that evolves. Certainly land use considerations there, safety and security, waste management. We've also heard about emerging technologies in hydrogen energy and the idea of both blue, I believe, and green hydrogen, where there's different levels of efficiency and sustainability depending on, whether you're generating that hydrogen utilizing conventional energy sources, or if you're, in the case of green hydrogen, whether you're producing that hydrogen from water utilizing renewable sources, and then the energy demand for that. Clean natural gas, other emerging renewable sources, tidal and wave energy, geothermal, certainly wind, offshore and onshore, biomass and bioenergy. I think there's a whole host of different emerging energy generation facilities that, in the next decade, I expect that we're going to begin to see at the local level. So exciting times. I think, it presents challenges, right? To really think about this. And, for localities, I think it helps to, we can't forecast what's necessarily going to occur in the next 6 months, if, definitely not a year. A lot of this is outside of our control. We can certainly advocate for our preferred conditions. And I think the best thing that we can do is, especially in the case of the legislation that was pending, we can expect that the status quo is going to be there. But beyond the status quo, what is realistic, what is reasonable to expect that could occur? Some level of preemption may occur. I think ultimately for us, it all falls back on ensuring that you're utilizing best planning practices and best land use regulation practices today, and that you're prepared to evolve those if conditions change.
Right. Mike, I think this, I had another question, but I think you kind of answered it, which is, what is the Berkley Group thinking and preparing its clients for in the energy future? And I think throughout this conversation, you've really, you and the Berkley Group have really, really set out the stage that you're looking at things such as the larger grid within the PJM service territory, trends that you're seeing. So I think that's great. So I want to thank you again for being here today. And we value our partnership with the Berkley Group and all the great work you do for our members. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Joe. And I appreciate all of VACO's membership, not just our clients, but all of the members. I think we collectively learn from each other. And, I think that's what we strive to do is not pretend to know anything more than anyone else. And we try to learn all of the best practices and learn from everyone's challenges and everyone's successes. So we appreciate the time, and happy to serve VACO in whatever capacity we can.
Great, thanks.